Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with returning champion, the mother of mindfulness, multi-best-selling author, and we're talking about her new book, which is Mindful Body, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health, Professor Ellen Langer. Now, we've been talking a lot about in part 1 about the mind-body, and I want to be really clear because you've likely heard that term, the mind-body connection, but as Ellen will get into in a little bit, and her and I have discussed before, is there is no mind-body. There is no separation. These things are one and the same. But we live in this reductionistic world where we like to break things into pieces and say, oh, this connects to that, or this controls that. But the truth is there is no separation, and that's what all this research has been about with this amazing book. As I said, we've talked about a lot in part 1 of the show. If you didn't catch part 1, I highly encourage you to go back and listen, watch part 1 of the show before you get to part 2. We're going to dive deeper here, and we're going to talk more about how all this matters to you, how it changes your neuroscience, your neurobiology, how it changes your physiology, how stress is impacting you, all those kind of things. We're going to dive deeper into that. But, there's something I really want you to understand. And I've said this to you before. I love this show, and I love the depth that we can go to with people. But I really want you to be clear. This is not the book. You're going to get a lot more out of studying that book. And certainly this should whet your appetite and get you excited about some things. But if you're really serious about this, go grab the book. And in fact, if you know somebody who is facing some kind of medical challenge, I would encourage you to buy the book for them and give it to them. Not because you're trying to demean anybody else's opinion, but because you're letting that person know that their health is in their mind. Their health is in their thinking, that they have the power and control over that. So let's dive back into part 2 of the show, Ellen, and talk about this idea, which was the catalyst for my interest in neuroscience back in the early 80s. I was fascinated by stress. I was fascinated by cortisol, which was very early understanding of cortisol and the stress hormone and what brings about it and the impact it has on the body and on the neuroscience. So I know you've done a lot of work into this. So open that door for us.
Okay. First of all, people need to recognize that it wasn't that long ago that the medical model believed that psychology was totally irrelevant to health. I'm sure all the doctors, even in the past, were nice people, wanted everybody to be happy. But the belief was the only way you were going to get sick was the introduction of an antigen, right?
Yes.
Now things have changed and people have come around to, as you said, this mind-body connection, which sounds nice, except how are they connected? It doesn't really take us to any new place, which is why I want people to understand mind-body unity. It's one thing, which means wherever you put the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. Now, physicians know that stress is not good for you, although not that many decades ago, they didn't acknowledge it. I don't have data for this particular statement, but I believe stress is the major killer. That if you took people with any disease, so we took 100 people with breast cancer, for example, colon cancer, doesn't matter what, and nobody is going to be happy when they get a diagnosis they have cancer, so let's give them 3 weeks to adjust. After that point, if we measured their stress level every few weeks or once a month, I believe that level of stress would predict the course of the disease more so than genetics, nutrition, even treatment. Okay, now everybody knows or should know that stress is psychological, right? Events don't cause stress. What causes stress is the view you take of the event. The more mindful you are, the more potential views you have of events, the less stressed you're going to be. So we don't have time to go through too much of this, but let me just give people a couple of one-liners to hold on to. The first is the next time you're stressed, just ask yourself, is it a tragedy or an inconvenience? My car got into an accident. I missed the bus. I missed the deadline. These really aren't important. So if you just breathe and ask yourself that, you'll feel better. Now, interestingly, to be stressed, 2 things need to happen. The first is that you have to believe something's going to happen. The second, that when it happens, it's going to be awful. Well, it turns out that we can't predict. We think we can predict. So the next time you're worried about something, just ask yourself, how likely is it? Name 5 reasons that it might not happen. So it went from it's going to happen to maybe it won't happen. Now comes the fun part. Imagine it does happen. How might that actually be a good thing? Everything can be understood in multiple ways. No matter how bad something seems, people are so afraid their spouse is going to leave them. Well, a relationship requires two people. If you're worried your spouse is going to leave you, you don't have a good relationship, and you're better off for your spouse to leave you so that you may be able to find a more meaningful relationship.
I think it's really important for any of us, though. You've got to understand that, first of all, you have what I call your emotional source code, which means it's the stuff that happened to you, and out of that, you've built meaning. And you've translated that meaning into everything that's showing up in your life every day, all day long. And the truth of the matter is that meaning may be at best outdated and maybe completely dysfunctional.
We don't question things. We just assume this is good, that's bad, this is what I should do or shouldn't do. And you don't have a second chance at all this living. It's time to wake up and recognize the choices that we actually do have. Let me say, one of the things that I don't think people realize is that emotions themselves are choices. But since I was speaking about relationships, you made me angry. Nobody is making you anything. As soon as you take a situation where you think that you had to respond that way, and you can find even one other person who wouldn't respond that way, you see that you have a choice. Your reactions are a function of the way you frame the situation. If you choose a different way of understanding it, you're going to feel differently about it. If I think you're a snob, I'm going to feel belittled by you. I'm going to not want to befriend you, and so on. If I see those very same actions because you're shy, then I'm going to reach out to you. And whether you were a snob or not to begin with, chances are you'd respond positively to that, and our beautiful relationship can go forward.
It's one of the things I said to people as part of my philosophy is, I will not judge you by somebody else's experience of you. I've got a friend who I remember walking down the street with and seeing some other friend, and I sort of gave a wave to my other friend and carried on walking with the friend I was with. And then later on, several days later, saw this person I'd waved to. He said, how can you hang out with that guy? He's an asshole. I saw you the other day. I said, no, I don't know that guy. And he goes, you don't know him? You were with him? I said, no, I don't know the guy you're talking about. The guy I'm with is spiritual, he's playful, he's fun, he's creative. And he's like, that asshole? I'm like, yes, because that's not who he is.
So I have a treatment for illness that's very, very effective that I talk about in the book, which is attention to symptom variability, noticing when it's better or worse, and so on. People can read about it. But it's also interpersonally effective. When you think this guy is whatever, you just go an asshole, whatever you called him, if you simply pay attention to the moments he's not behaving in that way. When you say to somebody, nobody always anything. And that's the way that we're mindless, and our mindlessness is hurting our relationships.
So stress is still real?
Well, no, because I think everybody thinks life has to be stressful. Work has to be stressful. And I can't be the only person in the world who doesn't experience this stress. That's not to say I've never been stressed, certainly. Let's say my battery is about to go out. So the battery goes out and, oh my God, we're in the middle of a podcast. It won't be tragic. If you live your life often enough this way, you naturally find alternatives that are pleasing. And it just doesn't matter. Lots of business gurus speak about work-life balance. So the way to deal with the stress that you must experience at work is to have some recreation, have a social life, a family life to counteract. And I think that it's mindless to seek work-life balance. And like I was telling you before about better than better, of course, work-life balance is better than work-life imbalance.
Yes.
But a better than better way of living your life, I think, is work-life integration. You want to be the same person no matter where you are. You want to not take yourself so seriously, but still take what you do seriously, whether it's work or play. I think that if we expect situations to be stressful, then we look for all the ways that they're uncomfortable. We pay attention to all the things that could go wrong, rather than be just a little easier about everything. In some sense, this naturally happens. People, your listeners, can look forward to this as they get older. But it's not because so many people have grown up when they're, let's say, 70. It's because when you're 70, most of the world is 30, 20, 50, and younger people just aren't as stressful. We're just not as afraid of them as we were before. The one-liner is simply to ask yourself the last 3 times you were stressed, what happened?
Right.
And magically, you got through it. Most of the things that we get stressed about never happen.
In my work, one of the things I'll talk about is that your greatest addiction is your identity. The thing you get identified with is what you're going to fight for to the bitter end. And at the same time, what is all the things you have associated to that identity, including stress or a way of being? And the truth of the matter is that everything looking back is going to seem different than it does looking at it in the moment. And this is the key thing around when people talk about mindfulness. It's about being present. And that's certainly very important. And so sometimes you're going to be present with an uncomfortable feeling, but it's not permanent. And that's where I think people get mixed up, is understanding that it's not permanent.
I respectfully, affectionately disagree.
Great. Good. Love that.
If you're feeling uncomfortable, then a better way to be is to know it'll pass and in some sense accept it. But the better way is to question why you're uncomfortable in the first place, because that discomfort is typically based on a prediction.
Yes.
And as I said to you before, we really can't predict.
No.
In fact, if you think about the things that you're predicting, and again, did those things happen or not? Every time you throw something out because it's gotten rotten in your refrigerator is an instance of mispredicting, right? Oh, I thought I was going to want 6 lamb chops. I only wanted 3.
Yeah.
People need to understand that you can't predict. It's very hard because most things lead us to believe we can predict. And that's because we can predict to the group, not the individual. So, for example, if I were to make you a wager, $1 million, we'll go to a Mercedes parking lot. Let's say there are 100 cars. Pick a car at random. I'll give you the key. If the car starts, I'll give you $1 million. If the car doesn't start, you give me everything you own and what you're likely to earn in the next 5 years. Now, Mercedes are good cars, but everybody knows that there are lemons, and nobody is going to risk their future earnings. Michael Jordan, wonderful basketball player, but on occasion he misses a shot.
Yes.
All right. So we can predict to the group. Then the group can be Michael Jordan's overall performance. Yes, he's going to make most of the baskets he attempts, but still we can't predict on any individual occasion if he's going to or not. That's very important because if we go back to the major stressor, I believe, is actually making decisions.
Yes.
And we cannot make decisions for a number of reasons. People will have to read the argument in The Mindful Body. But you can't make a decision without predicting what you think the different options are going to be. And I don't want to make it complicated. I want to give people the solution, which will sound bizarre, but do it. It always works. Rather than waste your time trying to make the right decision, instead make the decision right. Whatever outcome you have, approach it mindfully. Make it work. The reason that decision-making is misunderstood so grossly, even by, dare I say, decision theorists, is because you make a decision to take an action. As soon as you take that action, there's no way to evaluate whether it was a good decision or not because you can't play the other option.
Yeah.
Should I take this job or should I take that job? So you take the first job. Now you are already a different person.
Yeah.
More experienced, more obnoxious. It doesn't matter positive or negative. You've been changed by it. So that now you want the other job, you're not the same person attempting it.
Yeah.
So we can never make the comparison. I had my students in an advanced decision class at Harvard do this. I said, I want you to spend the entire week not making a decision. What I want you to do is use some heuristic. Flip a coin, decide the first choice that comes to your mind, whatever it is. Just don't get yourself. They did this for a week, and then they came back. I said, so how was it? I said, it was a wonderful week. It was stress-free. Because if you're making a decision, should I get the surgery, how can you not be very stressed? And remember, we said how bad for your health stress is. For me, even a decision about should I have M&M peanuts or a Mounds bar can be a major decision.
Yes.
You can't know how either of them are going to taste. As soon as you start to eat one, everything in your body is different. You can't evaluate how that other one would have tasted. And if we recognize that the experience of whatever outcomes is totally under our control. So you and I, Dove, go out for lunch. It's wonderful. That's great. The food is awful. That's great. I'll eat less and I'll listen to you more. No matter what the circumstances are, there's a way to derive satisfaction from them. And when you recognize that, then you can't make the wrong decision. A wrong decision means there are going to be negative outcomes that you're going to have to experience, but outcomes in and of themselves aren't positive or negative or anything.
There's a consequence, but it doesn't necessarily mean the consequence is negative. It means that you created a consequence. Right. So you created a consequence. So let's take that into the real world for a minute, particularly because we're talking about this, the mind body as one. So somebody's supposed to have a surgery for something that seems very urgent. They are nervous and they could choose to have the surgery. They could choose not to have the surgery, but nobody's entering into the world of decisions without a backlog of opinions and information that has gone back into their lives and 50 TV shows they saw about somebody who had cancer or a friend who died with cancer or somebody who miraculously survived cancer. We have to be very cautious here of understanding that there's a backlog of information that is pouring in the moment of decision. And that's the lack of mindfulness, I would suggest.
It's hard to imagine being faced with a decision like that, should you have the surgery, any kind of surgery or not, and recognize there's no way to know. That even if the surgery was extremely successful, nothing is successful with everybody. Mm-hmm. And are you going to be the one person for whom it's not successful? Or you decide not to have it, and you believe you should have had it, but there are some people who don't have it, who do perfectly fine. You can't know. That's probably in the short run going to make people more stressed rather than less stressed. But you can do things once you make either decision. So if you have the surgery, there are things that you can do to make the surgery more successful. Once you're out of surgery, there are ways you can organize yourself, so to speak, more mindfully that will facilitate all the positive outcomes that you want. It's also the case, if you choose not to have the surgery, that doesn't mean you're not going to take care of yourself. There are still many things that you can do for yourself.
Yeah.
It's the not doing that is the bigger problem than making the right decision. You can't know. Sadly, it'd be nice if we could know. We pretend we know. We say, doctor, what would you do if it were your wife, daughter, husband? And then we mindlessly follow suit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for us all to recognize that there is a level of personal responsibility here. I remember years ago answering this question when somebody asked me about intuition. And I say, you only think your intuition's right when it showed up that there was evidence. And they go, okay, well, what do you mean? I said, let's imagine you're driving down a road and you have an intuition to turn left, and you turn left and you take a different route home and nothing happens. And you go, well, I guess my intuition was off. No, how do you know the 59 million other things that could have happened if you'd have not followed that intuition? You don't actually know if intuition's right or wrong. You can just choose to follow it, and that's it.
I think that we need a more sophisticated language of intuition, because the intuition that you're referring to would be mindful. You're aware of information without knowing from where it's coming, right, or how you know it. But it's also the case that if you hear a song, whether you're a child or an adult, you hear it sung by some famous singer, and then you hear it again and again. Now, if you hear a different rendition of that song, it feels wrong intuitively. It just feels wrong, which means that something that deviates from a mindless expectation,
yes,
may feel wrong, which would mean the intuition is not the glorious thing many of us think that it is.
To use my language, normal isn't healthy. Normal is just whatever you got used to. It's just simply repeating a pattern. And so therefore people put themselves into abusive situations over and over again because it's normal for them, because that's what they expect. And so this is the very best version of this song, Well, how do you know? Have you heard all the other versions? I certainly like originals, but every now and then there's a cover comes out that I'm like mad about. Like I loved Prince's Kiss, and then Tom Jones did it, and I'm like, oh my God, that is magnificent. That was the best version ever. I loved Hurt by Nine Inch Nails, and then Johnny Cash did it, and I'm like, wow, what a great cover. It's curiosity that is an open-ended curiosity. That's what I really love about what you're saying here. In the context of mindfulness, it's an open-ended curiosity.
Yeah, you never get to a final answer, so everything stays new. And what people probably don't know, and our research has made very clear, is that mindfulness, which to me, again, is just actively noticing new things, that's energy begetting rather than consuming. So you're actively noticing new things. It's literally and figuratively enlivening. Not only that, but when you're in this state, people find you more attractive, more authentic, more trustworthy. Not only that, but that when you're doing whatever you're doing, if you're doing it mindfully, and mindfulness leaves its imprint on what you're doing, so it is better. So it's easy. It's the essence of fun. It's energy begetting. It's that which is going to keep you healthy. It's hard for me to understand that anybody who truly understands what we're saying would not make a commitment to change in these very simple ways. You had said before about being in the present, and lots of people tell people the way to be mindful is to be in the present. And I think that's sweet, but it's empty. Because when you're not in the present, you're not there to know you're not there.
Good.
How do you get there? And there are two ways. One is to actively notice new things about the things you think you know. And then you're going to see, gee, you didn't know them as well as you thought you did. And that will then bring you to the present. The other is a little more sophisticated, is to accept at the start that uncertainty is the rule, not the exception.
Oh.
And that none of us, no matter how smart we are, no matter how experienced, know for sure. And that's why I go back to my 1 and 1 is 2. The thing everybody thinks they know the best is wrong in some contexts.
Right.
I've talked and written a lot about mind-body unity. The other day I realized people don't even have body unity. What do I mean by that? There are people who will take a drug for a headache and not realize it's affecting every other part of their body. Mm-hmm. Now, what's interesting, and we're doing some new research on this, is that we have people who are aware that anything that happens to any part of the body is simultaneously happening to every part of the body. So imagine somebody with that view just doing simple lifting weights versus somebody who's lifting the same weights, who's oblivious to every part of their body being affected.
Yeah.
The one who is aware will actually strengthen their entire body. And what people need to understand, if they were able to look at the chambermaid study, which was our second mind-body unity study, here we have chambermaids who are exercising all day long, but don't realize that their work is exercise. So they're not getting the effects of all that exercise.
Right.
Then we teach them that their work is exercise. And now, by doing the same thing they did before, but just opening up the possibility, all of their body is affected. They lose weight. There's a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure comes down. So that was the nocebo that you spoke about before. People don't realize that there's a pretty large literature at this point that if you take a drug, for instance, but you don't think the drug is going to work, it won't work.
No.
So an early study of this, they gave people Ipecac. Now, I don't know if your listeners know, Ipecac is taken to make you vomit. So if somebody had a kid who's ingested poison unintentionally, and you give them Ipecac, they vomit and they're going to be better. So in this study, people were given Ipecac, remember, a drug designed to make you vomit, but they were told the drug prevents you from vomiting.
Right.
And what happens? They didn't vomit.
No.
Right. So our thoughts are important even for the drugs and medical procedures that we readily avail ourselves to.
The greatest pharmacy in the world is between your ears.
Yeah, that I can't say enough. Every aspect of our life is improved by this very simple understanding of our mind-body unity and the power. We want to exploit the power of uncertainty. At the end of the day, the most important takeaway for people is that virtually everything is mutable. Everything. That's sort of mind-boggling because the glove doesn't fit, the golf club is too long, no matter what it is. Everything was at one point a decision. It wasn't handed down from the heaven. That means a group of people decided what it should be.
Yes.
If we remember that it was a decision, then we can ourselves change and decide differently.
Yes, I agree.
It becomes a very exciting set of possibilities for us.
I want to ask you a question which is kind of related to where we started. If you were to go back in time and meet your little self, and this is a self who's probably somewhere between 8 and 12 years old, what do you think that little girl would think about you as you are today? What would be her impression of you, looking up at you from being 8 to 12 years old and seeing Professor Ellen and go,
Yeah, I think and would hope that she'd be pleased, not because I'm Professor Langer, but because I'm an adult that smiles a lot, that is basically happy, and that feels it's time to give, hopefully, so that other people can live in the same space. When I was 8 or 12, I remember where somebody has said to me, "Why are you smiling?" And it immediately took the smile off my face. And it's nice that if my 8-year-old self met my 77-year-old self smiling, and if somebody now asks me, "Why are you smiling?" to hear me say, "Why aren't you smiling?"
Exactly. Well, you've definitely brought a smile to my face. You always do. And I've loved what you've shared. Thank you so much. Please tell people where they can find out more about you. And we'll, of course, make sure that that's posted in the show notes.
I think that if you Google me, The Mindful Body was published by Random House. You can go to Random House, Amazon, wherever you get your books. If you want to know what I've been doing, I think that just Google my name and too much will probably come up, so then you can randomly choose.
Well, of course, we'll make sure that all the links are posted in the show notes. And you can simply go to ellenlanger.com. That's ELLENLANGER.com. That's the main website where you'll find out everything you can about Ellen. And of course, you can find her books on all the usual outlets. But again, we'll make sure all the links are posted in the show notes. I hope you'll stay with us to the end here, Ellen. And for you, dear listener, remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of that tribe. This is really important for you to understand. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know that they've got to tap into meaning. You can tap into this groundbreaking understanding with me. I'm Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness the emotional source code and how to move their tribe, because unified, actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please go to wherever you go to tune into the show, and do us a favor, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. It makes a big difference, and we really appreciate it. For those of you who are regular listeners, a big thank you to you. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about the mind, body as one. That everything you think is absolute, get curious about it. As you've heard me say so many times, get curious about what it is you think you already know. What if you could know more? The death rattle that the ego puts in your mind is, I know that. As soon as you say, I know that, you've stopped learning, you've stopped growing. So stay curious, my friends, stay curious. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and in your leadership impact. And I am out.